Welcome to the Afterlife Files, where we investigate near-death experiences, shared death experiences, and all things afterlife, and how they affect you. Unlike podcasts that are just stories, we will give you a heads up on what to look for in our conversation, and then, after the interview, stick around. We'll help you make sense of those accounts so you can incorporate the insights into your life. I think you'll find that once having your most profound questions answered, living life in the physical will be filled with much more peace and joy. If you're fascinated by near-death or shared-death experiences and have ever said to yourself, I would love to encounter the same places as experiencers, this is why I've created both guided meditation albums and the extensive 5.5-day near-death experiential retreat. There's a link below that will give you all the details, and I hope that you will find this a profound way to explore the non-physical universe and easily access expanded states of awareness. Today's topic is reincarnation. Our guests, Dave and Carla, discovered the talent to experience past lives during a meditation initiative at work, and then subsequently stumbled on how many times they have been in each other's lives. 5 highlights from our conversation include a touching story about how they first met at the age of 3. This is great. 2, the extraordinary efforts they put into verifying these past lives with remarkable confirmation. The 5 simple rules for living. They say them pretty quickly at the beginning of the interview, but we circle around to revisit this topic towards the end of the conversation, so stick around. It'll be worth it. And 4, how similar the attributes of reliving past lives are to near-death and sheer-death experiences. And 5, I particularly liked our conversation about how karma is not punishment and how that plays out when we design our next sojourn into the physical. Here's our interview. With us today is a pair of real treats. How about that? Dr. David Bettenhausen and Carla BogniKidd. And they have a wonderful introduction here, so let me read it for you. Dave and Carla have been close friends since 1998. Feeling a deeper spiritual kinship for each other, Dave and Carla had spontaneous memories of 29 past lives while meditating. They went on to get past life regression training with Dr. Brian Weiss. Now, Dave and Carla spread the message of love and kindness and teach holistic approaches to healing. They teach meditation at their local university and senior centers. Dr. Dave was a registered nurse for 10 years before returning to medical school. He recently retired from his private practice. Dr. Dave now serves as Vice President of Medical Affairs at a small Midwestern hospital. Carla recently retired as his office manager. Congratulations, Carla.
Thank you.
They now share their message together. The gift of past lives and love is the answer. Welcome, David and Carla. Nice to have you here.
Thank you for having us.
It's very much a pleasure, Scott.
So we're talking reincarnation today. How did all this start out? I hear it's an interesting story.
We'll try to make it as little shorter for your listeners, but we're going to fill you in. It all started in our office. We started electronic medical records, and it was very stressful. Neither Carla or I are 29 anymore. When we started electronic medical records, when it became mandated, it required a lot of different attention, and the days suddenly became 12-hour days because we had to put so much other information in that we weren't used to, and to see enough of the same number of patients made it very difficult. And so Carla recommended that I had to do something because I became grouchy.
Yeah, I like to say that Dave's a cross between Fred Flintstone and Yogi Bear, but he wasn't during that time. He was so cranky unapproachable. So one day I said to him, you know, I can call a counselor if you want me to, or what if we try meditation as an office? I had read an article in AARP magazine, that's dating us, about the benefits, and the benefits were, there were so many.
So benefits of meditation, just to put them out there: lowers blood sugar, lowers blood pressure, increases dopamine and serotonin, which are the same medications we give you for depression. It decreases cortisol, and it's interesting because the first year that I meditated, I dropped 100 pounds. Cortisol is that stress hormone that makes you gain weight, which was really working on me. It allows you just to relax, calm, shut off all the busyness. And with all the electronic stuff going on with the medical records, it calmed me down very quickly, and it was very relaxing.
And we didn't know until the day we began to meditate that Dave had a gift and he could connect to the spiritual world just like we're talking right now. And so that's exactly what happened on the third day of meditation. Dave came up to me afterwards and he said, Carla, I think I was talking to your mother. Now, he never met my mother. She died 18 years before this happened. And I said, well, why do you think it was my mother? And he said, well, she looked like you. She was laughing and jovial, and she kept showing me a shoe. And I went to the computer and I Googled ballroom dancing shoes, and 60 or 70 pairs showed up. And I said, which one? And he pointed to the exact shoe my mother always wore. She ballroom danced. She wore it for church, for dress up. It was a short pump, open-toed sandal. For him to guess that one it got my attention. So my sister also worked in the office at the time, and she pulled out her wallet and she pulled out a picture and showed it to Dave. And she said, is this who you were speaking with? And Dave got very emotional. He said, yes, that's who I was speaking with. So we continued to meditate. I wanted to speak to my mother, so did my sister, but we didn't know what was going to happen. And the more we meditated, we got pictures of places and objects, things that didn't make any sense to us, but we kept journaling everything. And a couple of days later, Dave started to speak to a woman.
Yep, and she told me her name was Isabella. And Isabella said she had been with me for 6,000 years.
Oh my.
That already
That is,
made,
you know, that's quite a date.
yes. So that kind of got my attention, and I was trying to tell everybody in the office, and I was thinking maybe I was losing my mind, and we kept meditating. And then there was a day where I suddenly had a memory from 1962. Now, in 1962, I was 3 years old. And I remembered getting in the blue sedan with my mother and father and driving all the way across the country. I lived in Nebraska, and we drove all the way to Boston. I remembered married student housing there because my dad was going to graduate school. He actually had a specialist in education, so he might relate to some of your educational background too. And during that summer, I had a memory of going to a beach in Boston where there was an amusement park and roller coasters and Ferris wheels and this whole souvenir shop line across the road. And I'm telling these guys the memory because I'm running on the beach in Boston and I'm screaming, and this little girl pushes me down. She sits on my chest. She gives me a kiss in the middle of the forehead. She jumps up. She's standing there in a little two-piece blue ruffled bathing suit, and she yells, "Be quiet, you're bothering my family."
What a little bully I was. But I was, my family was from Boston, and I didn't need to meditate to have this memory. We were not well off. I was the youngest of 6 girls, good Catholic family. My parents were always splitting up, never quite getting divorced. But that particular day, we didn't own a car. My father rented 2 cabs. We all went to Revere Beach. And as Dave was speaking about Revere Beach, my sister and I knew exactly which amusement park he was talking about at the beach. And our first question was, when were you in Boston? All these years we had worked together, and he never said anything. But that day, for whatever reason, when we got there, I didn't have a bathing suit. So we went across the street to one of those little souvenir shops, and I got my first brand new 2-piece blue ruffled bathing suit etched in my mind forever. And when Dave knew that, again, that was one of those aha moments. We thought, how could you possibly know that? So we continued to meditate.
And then
shortly.
the big event sort of happened. I was meditating and I had another memory. And this time I'm standing in a dark alley and I'm looking across the alley and there's a woman there. Now I know it's Carla. She doesn't exactly look like Carla, but I know it's Carla. And she's got a little gold band on. Her hair is slicked back and she's wearing fringed skirt. I see two large flashes. I hear two large bangs, and then I'm hit in the chest, and I realize I'm shot, and I'm thrown back in an alley, and I'm dying. I'm telling them the story, and I said, I don't know where this is coming from. The next day, meditating, I got more of the story. What happened before that date was that I got in a little bitty car and drove with a friend who worked with me at the bank. And we drove to Ashland Auditorium in Chicago, Illinois, and went to a wedding of a man named Angelo who did business at the bank where I worked. During that wedding, the same woman that I saw in that dark alley got up and was the wedding singer. And she sang the Ave Maria, and it was beautiful. I searched at the reception to find her. And when I did, I kept pestering her until she agreed to go to breakfast with me the next day. At breakfast the next day, I'm sitting in a restaurant called Marino's, and she walks in the door, comes over, sits down, we eat breakfast, we take a walk along the Chicago coastline. She tells me she's from Bullock, Georgia, and that she has moved to Chicago to become a singer and a dressmaker. Her name is Ruby Donaldson, and that she was a flapper who worked for the man named Angelo, who was the man who got married on January 10th, 1925. That's the background.
Now, like anybody else, that wasn't that long ago. And I thought, well, certainly if we have some information, I should be able to find some proof. So I got onto ancestry.com and I did indeed find Ruby Donaldson, born in 1904, to James and Anna Donaldson, one of 11 children. And I also found articles from the wedding of Angelo Jenna to Lucille Spinola on January the 10th, 1925. We had information corroborated. I called Dave back and I said, you're not crazy. I found these things. That's where it's real.
This is where Isabella comes in and again and starts to tell us more stories and shares lessons with us. Isabella is a spirit guide, as I call it. She says she's a spirit of God. Isabella has shared with us, first of all, the 5 simple rules for living, which were live without conceit, selfishness, jealousy, and unforgiveness, and make all choices out of love. And she's also shared and helped guide us through other past life memories, 42 past lives for me, 34 for Carla, and 29 of them that we have shared together.
That's remarkable. Oh my gosh. So Isabella is a non-physical guide?
Correct. And
so I'm confused. Who is the one with the slick back hair?
that was Carla, Ruby Donaldson in 1925.
All right. So what did you do to deserve to get shot over her?
Well, she actually was somewhat owned at the time as a flapper working at a speakeasy called DeAndre's that is no longer in Chicago now. It's part of the University of Chicago, that block. But we've actually traveled back to Chicago, walked down Halstead Street, turned, and found by memory, and with Isabella helping, the apartment that Ruby Donaldson lived in 1925. And it's still there. A friend of ours did some research and found out the building was built in 1899, and it actually has been an apartment building ever since.
And the name of the building is called the Isabella Apartments.
Oh my.
Synchronicities.
Don't we love that?
We love it.
Synchronicities.
So again, as a physician, I became really curious in everything. Started doing as much research as I could. We started finding research by Ian Stevenson Jim Matlock, um, Jim Tucker, with kids who had spontaneous memories.
Yep, we're real fans of the University of Virginia's
Perceptual
Department of
studies.
Perceptual Studies. Yeah,
Absolutely. And so we found all these kids with these same kind of stories that I had. And then I started looking at, a lot of people had past life regression experiences. We had not yet. We did go get training, but I started looking at every research thing I could find. And I found that during meditation, during the time between wake and sleep, during past life regression hypnosis, people have increase in alpha and theta waves that are just the same. And those are all things that show up in the brain when we're having memories. So I'm like, okay, so there is something here that makes sense. We did, after we found all these things, go to train with Dr. Weiss, because not only did we want to have the same training, we were sort of doing regression on ourselves and didn't know it. But we also wanted to be there because there was 150 like people having the same training.
From all over the world.
And so we got to speak to people who had the same experience we did. And then we're now trying to share all the experience that we've had. But in doing some of our research, we've interacted with people with near-death experiences. These kids who've had memories, my own memories of time between lives. And we start to realize that all of those things, the near-death experiences, the kids intervening between life memories, my own past life memories, the time between life memories, all have some things that are very much in common, including past life reviews, spiritual beings that they see, frequently feeling that overwhelming love and sense of joy or happiness while they're there. Even having some sort of an event where you plan or partake in planning your next life.
So what do you think the point of reincarnation is?
Well, I think the point is, and we've written a number of books, but I think the point is that we actually evolve over multiple lives, and that we are born, if you want to call this more instinctual. So in the beginning of time, or thousands of years ago, we were creatures that lived mostly on instinct, lived day to day. Some 6,000 years ago, an incredible 6 to 10,000 years ago, an incredible event occurred with our development in language. And during the development of language, we were able to come up with the word promise. If you talk biblically, you see the word covenant, where you can sacrifice something today to make a difference for tomorrow. You can put off immediate gratification, because the early human lived day to day just like an animal, second to second, concerned with the next meal. And as soon as we could make that jump where communication allowed us to start planning for the future, we could cooperate with each other. And at that moment, or at least for us 6,000 years ago, we got a soul, so that we could save those pieces of information in our subconscious mind. And I tell people this story. You know, the first time you touch something in this life, it's hot, it burns you. The second time you touch something that's hot, you pull back faster. If through thousands of years of experience, you start to experience running away from the tiger, not standing in a dark alley where a mobster can shoot you, you learn those things to avoid, and you learn to make decisions that aren't based on conceit, selfishness, jealousy, and unforgiveness, and start making all decisions out of love. And if you do, then you really get off this wheel and return back as the love in which you were created, to that unseen realm, the spiritual world, heaven, if you want to call it that, back to source, creator, Tao, God, Brahman, whatever your terminology is for the source of all energy and creation.
So it's your contention then that the information that we learn in a particular lifetime is ours forever. It
is ours forever.
Informs our other lives.
Correct. And if you look at some of the medical science related to that, it actually says that there is this modular theory where everything is recorded in our subconscious as either a positive or negative experience. And if it follows us life to life, then it's helping us learn even if we don't remember the memories. That's where things like deja vu, synchronicity, all of that starts to come in, where people see these things and they keep following them.
So does reincarnation help the rest of us? I mean, if you had an experience, can I learn from that?
You actually can learn from that. It just like you can learn from history. In fact, our first book, The Gift of Past Lives with Mother Isabella, God, and Elizabeth, includes 20 stories. And during those 20 stories, at the end, we actually explain what we did wrong and what we had to learn in that life and why we have to come back. So you can learn from our example, or you can learn from history's example. You know, if you look at war, there really is never a winner in war. And we found lives, because we've had so many together, that we've been able to piece things together. So we found lives where we were Vikings fighting the Scottish, then Scottish fighting the English in the next life, and then English again fighting the Scottish, sometimes fighting on the opposite sides of the same war, realizing there really is no winner because one side of the war is going to lose. Those are the things you can learn.
There really is no winner. So then it's your contention that karma is real.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
And karma is not punishment. Karma is another chance. But you're setting yourself up in this life for the next one if you don't keep your nose clean. The quickest way to come back against someone that you're prejudiced against, you'll be on the opposite side.
And we looked back and found the same kind of pattern. We found that we've been slave owners and slaves. We've been black and white. You know, we've been rich and poor. Because if you don't live both sides, you'll never understand.
Got it. So what happens then during that time of life between lives?
Well, it's very interesting. Some of it ties into things that you may have even heard before in religions and everything else. Certainly there is a transition period that usually occurs for those people who are reincarnating. They have about 3 days where they're somewhat confused, which is about the only difference that I can see between some people who report near-death experiences. There is an experience of traveling through time, space, and eternity. Tunnel experience, great amounts of light, colors, auditory hallucinations, or something that occurs that seems to be bigger and better, quicker, losing of your senses. All of that seems to happen. Then you get visited by loved ones, someone who has passed before you. Again, a lot of near-death experience people report that.
Yep, this is all sounding very familiar.
And then there's a council that comes and tries to teach you, and you go through a near-death kind of past life review of your current past lives, and they show you things that you've done and haven't done, and things you should have done differently, or that you did wrong, even though I don't like to use the word wrong, but you negative.
Yeah.
And then they actually come and they start to give you different options of how to your next life planning will be. Now, if you've had a near-death experience, that may be that you get a lesson that this is what you need to do when you return to the world. And some people report things like that. In a past lifetime between lives memory, people get things like you need to work on being a better parent, or you need to work on being a more loving partner. Your next life is planned, and it is planned around some very specific things, including zodiac signs. And it's not the stars that influence you, it's when you're born that influences you. It happens to fall within zodiac signs. But different types of people are born during different types of the year. So those things are planned for you so that you will have some different personality in your next life. And part of it is related to your karma.
Say, Dave,
Yes.
when you talk about this as being planned, who does the planning?
Well, in our experience, it's your spirit guide, your angels, and God. And counsel, which is people who have passed and no longer have to return.
That have been part of your soul family in previous lives. They have had a life before where angels and spirit guides have not had lives.
Correct.
Yep. In the literature for near-death experience, they call that the council of friends.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, and just like you describe it, it has both human and non-human entities that help you map this thing out, all for your best interest and growth.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
That's exactly. So it's much like your near-death experience. And I think it's, literature. So I think it's interesting because when we have near-death experiences and past life experiences and they're the same, or a lot is in common, there is something in consciousness, your soul, whatever you would like to call it, that continues. That is separate somehow from your physical body. And that's what people experience with near-death experiences. That's what we've experienced when we've talked about reincarnation.
So, excuse me. So, Carla, you had these same kind of experiences that Dave did when you were meditating in the office. Talk about some of yours.
Well, mine are different. I get clips where Dave can go right back to the life and live it. I have recorded Dave. I took him back to a life when he was an 8-year-old. He was my neighbor in a life in South Dakota, before it was South Dakota. And he was a stutterer. And I have him taped. He stuttered the whole time. And I get blips. I get bits and pieces of that life. And normally when I get something, I will draw it. And it stays with me. The difference between a dream and I think a past life memory is it never leaves me. I can always, pull it up immediately. I get names. I see my spirit guide. Her name is Elizabeth. I have seen, because my mother is our gatekeeper, and I don't know if you've probably heard that term before. The gatekeeper is responsible for keeping negativity away from you. For instance, Isabella tells us that we are not supposed to go to mediums and psychics because they're foreseeing the future. And if they foresee the future for you and they tell you, that can affect your path. And these are things you need to learn on your own. So my mother is our gatekeeper, and every once in a while, she will let somebody from the past come in and talk to me for a minute. My grandmother, once in a while. But a couple of days after Dave got the memory about Ruby and JJ in Chicago, he walked in one day and he said, I have some more information to give you. And he said, sit down. And I started to sit down and he started to tell the story. And as he told the story, I completed his sentences. It all came flooding back to me. And we looked at each other like, what the heck just happened?
Yes, it literally became a conversation between J.J. Wright and Ruby Donaldson.
Mm-hmm. From 1925.
And it was a live conversation. And it was intense and personal. And we felt uncomfortable because there was an emotional draw that was significant that we had not had before.
Mm-hmm.
And we both actually leaped up and ran to opposite offices and ran down to see patients because it was uncomfortable.
Wow. So when you have these, all right, let me just back up for a second. I'm still curious about the training that you had with Brian Weiss. What did he add to your abilities? Because it sounds like they were substantial to begin with. And, you know, kind of like what was added to the equation for both of you?
Well, for me, you know, we practiced on people from all over the world. He does a lot of group therapy and group hypnosis. And it was interesting because I have a real hard time shutting my mind off, and I get most of my information bits or pieces in between wake and sleep. My mind, I never shut it off. So that's, you know, they have to creep up on me during that time. But it was interesting that during 2 of the group meditations that he did hypnosis with us, I had, and I don't know if it's because he took us deeper. I had 2 past life memories. One was I was a little girl in England. I was 11 years old, probably 12 by that time. And I poisoned a king, an abuser. And he had raped me and beat me regularly to the point where I had a baby at age 12, which was probably not uncommon back then. But my mother worked in the kitchen and she helped me poison him. And that came flooding back to me, and I felt remorse for doing it. And interestingly, that that particular guy happens to be my next door neighbor in this life. He's been in many of our lives, and we seem to have a lot of karma. But then the other memory I had was a life that I had as an Ethiopian, and I used a potion on my husband, and he found out about it, and he strangled me to death. And that came back. It's like I was right there. Well, this happens a lot. You know, the traumatic events normally pop up. But the fact that those 2 things popped up, and then I met some really nice people from all over the world that I regressed, and I was able to help them get past some things that were going on in their life from finding out things that had happened in past lives.
Tell them about the lady from Chile, only because she's a social worker.
Yes. Now, she came from Chile, a social worker. Her hospital had sent her to this conference to learn past life regression to help end stage patients.
End of life.
Yeah, end of life patients. And, you know, the United States is really far behind. We need to, you know, get with it. But I took her back. It was really new for me. And the body, the soul, I guess, will take you to where you need to learn and heal. And immediately I took her back to a time where Nero was persecuting the Christians and the Jews, burning them. And the Romans had stolen her son. And she was so upset. She was trying to find her son. And then as I took her ahead, she realized that her fiance in this life was her son in that life. And in the beginning of this relationship, she was really afraid of losing him. And she said it wasn't her normal nature. And she wasn't usually that possessive, but she didn't want him out of her sight. And we were able to see through this why. Because once upon a time, she did lose her son, and it was the same soul.
So that's really the part we picked up from Dr. Weiss, is sometimes dealing with your past life memory can heal a problem in this life.
Really helpful for a relationship where one of you is constantly checking you out all the time.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
So that's the plus that we learned there. But the other plus was just that there were so many people with memories and experiences like we had. So we knew
we weren't strange.
We weren't strange. We weren't the only people. And so because we had written the book, The Gift of Past Lives with Mother Isabella, Guy, and Elizabeth, And then we wrote a book, Hell No, Reincarnation, which is about reconciling the fact that we were raised Catholic with this new belief. And then the manual, which is a little bit about the time between lives and a little bit about planning your next life, that book, because we just had to share everything that we had experienced with others, because there are lessons in all of those things.
I get that. And how do you think, what's the mechanism for how reincarnation works?
Okay, that's a great question. And I'm going to use some of what I believe and some of what we've been told, because part of this is the consciousness or soul literally does go back to the spiritual world between. That doesn't mean the spiritual world is not somewhere here. It's just that none of us can experience it. So it transitions to the non-physical. That means our physical body probably has a receptor, because I'm a scientist as far as being a doctor. There has to be a receptor. The brain is literally like a receiver, connects to the consciousness.
Yep.
It's the receiver. It's the communication spot. It sees, transfers the energy to the consciousness, and consciousness transfers energy back, or the memories, the thoughts, back to the brain, which communicates it out through the body. So it's literally the brain is, and our body is the receiver.
The near-death people would say it's the receiver, and it's also the filter.
Yeah.
Correct.
There's just so much information that is available in the non-physical world. We couldn't take it here if it was all coming at the same time. So it acts as a filter.
Correct.
And what I'm guessing is that this training that you received helps to tweak the filter and remove some of the barriers for communication with the non-physical universe. How am I doing on that?
I think that's perfect.
Yes, exactly.
And okay, I want you to go back to the 5 simple rules for a second, because they went by me so fast. You have to slow down and do it again.
Sure.
Well, Isabella said, everybody knows the 10 Commandments, or they've heard about them. And this is just a shortened version. If you live a life without conceit, selfishness, jealousy, and unforgiveness, and you do everything out of love and compassion, you get off the karmic wheel. All of our fears, jealousy is an absolute waste. We've all been kings and queens, rich and poor, saints and sinners, yada, yada, yada. So there's no reason to be jealous. It's just your turn to be poor if you're poor, or your turn to be rich, because just because you're rich doesn't mean that you're a wonderful person or life is easy. And so with the 5 simple rules, you can liberate yourself if every time you make a choice or an action, you stop and say, why am I doing this? Is it out of conceit, jealousy, selfishness, unforgiveness? And if you can do all of that consciously, then you will be doing everything out of love and compassion. Love cannot live in the presence of conceit, jealousy, selfishness, and unforgiveness.
And you cannot live, and all of those, conceit, selfishness, jealousy, and unforgiveness, are all things that are expressions of fear, and you can't fear and love at the same time.
That's lovely. I haven't had it expressed to me quite that way at the same time. You can't be in fear and love at the same time.
Yes, because love cannot be forced, coerced, or it's not truly love.
Yeah. So your view of reincarnation comes from your experience and your the schooling that you've had with Dr. Weiss and the communication that you had with other people who do this work.
Correct.
How does that compare with other schools of reincarnation? Is everybody on the same page, or is it different?
Okay, so Scott, because I'm going to use a little bit of your near-death experience things to go through this, because you know that there are people who are Buddhist, who have a near-death experience. And we're here for experience. That's what you can share when you go to the non-physical world. So if the only experience you have is a Buddhist experience, you're probably going to have a Buddhist experience when you have your near-death experience, because all you can do is share what you know. A Catholic is going to go back and thinks Jesus comes to speak to him. A Buddhist is not going to think Jesus comes to speak to him. A Muslim's going to think that Muhammad's there meeting him at the pearly gates.
And a Christian who believes in hell that thinks they, aren't quite doing what they're supposed to be doing. They just might think that they're in hell and see fire and all of the, all the above that we've been told hell is. They might have that experience because that's what they believe is going to happen.
And you can only share what you've experienced on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the spiritual world, you don't have the same senses. You don't have the filters bringing it in. Those things don't exist. So what you're sharing telepathically, as most people say in that world, is the experience that you've had on earth. So again, you ask, what is the purpose of being here? Shared experience. Because without it, we have no way to communicate in the spiritual world.
That's lovely. Okay, so what's the next thing you guys are working on? Because I can tell the two of you are the kind of people who would always be challenging yourself to go to the next place. What is that? What are we contemplating right now?
Well, we just finished.
We just finished a fourth book that is
Of course you did.
which is a little bit different than the first three. This one is called Her Huba and His Rose. It is based on a past life that we experienced.
We are not the main characters.
But we're not the characters. We're sort of just observers of the story. And so it was written with Isabella's help, and it occurs during the First Temple period between 0 and 70 AD, that time of Roman occupation of Jerusalem. Huba means dear to one's heart in Aramaic, which was the main language. It's something that's interesting because religious history has become extremely important to us as we've tried to weave what we've experienced with what history is out there as far as what religion reports. And so Her Huba and His Rose is sort of another experience of a man named Huba and a woman he loved, the people that he loved, the God that he loved, and the experience that he had at that time.
That sounds like it'll be a really interesting book. So briefly, because I know you could spend all night on this one, as you are taking your experience of reincarnation and you're comparing it against some written records or traditions from various religious traditions, how are they matching up?
So surprisingly well. If you start with indigenous peoples like of Africa, American Indians, you find ancestor worship, which appears to follow in the same flow that reincarnation does in our experience. If you look at Hindu, you look at an experience that's based on really one greatest God and many small deities. If you look at Judaism, it's one supreme God and many small deities. If you look at even research of or history that people start talking about things like the Anunnaki and aliens, you're looking at somebody's story, which is a major deity and many lesser deities that have experienced the earth. If you look at Christianity, we have a main God with many lesser deities that are related. If you look at Judaism, reincarnation is a normal tenet of Judaism, and it always has been. It was a normal teaching at the time of Jesus. It's a normal teaching of the early Christian church at about 170 AD. Celsius, which is a name of a man at that time, writes out that he thinks there might be some secret society within the church that believes in reincarnation, but they're not telling anybody else because they're keeping it a secret. Origen of Alexander comes in. He proclaims that transmigration of the soul is a tenet of the faith, and that the soul exists before birth, during this life, and after this life. 200 years after, Origen, who was the main theologian of the time, makes the proclamation that reincarnation is part of the faith. In 200 AD, Justinian calls a council. He's part of the Roman government. The Council of Churches is pulled together. The churches excommunicate Origen 200 years after his death.
I hope he feels really bad about that.
So
which one of your books has this kind of really rich history about reincarnation?
That's Hell No.
yeah,
It's
that's
called Hell No Reincarnation.
Well, I love the title. So we're at a spot where we need to wrap this up. So this is your chance to do a commercial. So tell us what you're up to, where we can find your books, anything else that is relevant for people to get a hold of you and know more about you.
Well, if you want to go to our webpage, it's thegiftofpastlives.com. And all of our books are on there. You can purchase them through there. If you want to contact us, you can, there's a place there that you can email us and we try to answer, unless it's a crazy one, and then we try not to answer. But, during COVID, a lot of the small bookstore owners were really hit. And certainly you can order through them. You might have to wait a little bit longer, but, give them the opportunity if you can. We haven't really done much as far as seminars or anything with COVID, but hopefully in the future we will.
Yep. And then the last message is, this is one that anybody can follow. Mm-hmm. If we don't take care of each other personally, and we don't take care of this planet, not only is there no place for our friends and family or our children to grow up in, there'll be no place left for us to return to.
Amen. Thank you, David and Carla. This has been a wonderful conversation. You two are certainly just energetic, and I can just feel the passion that you have for this subject. So thank you for being with us today.
It was a pleasure, Scott.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wasn't the energy around our conversation wonderful? There are a couple of points that need a little bit of elaboration. Just to be clear, these are my viewpoints, but that's why you watch the Afterlife Files, to gain perspective by using more than one lens with which to view this rich information. It shouldn't have surprised me, but it did, that near-death and shared-death experiences, along with reincarnation, have so many shared common elements. That evidence reinforces that research into NDEs, SDEs, and reincarnation, they all reside within the same arena. Next, Dave's theory that the brain is the receptor, accumulating, filtering, and disseminating information to the body from the non-physical universe, is virtually identical to the current understanding in NDE research. Also, I particularly like Carla's comments about how jealousy is an absolute waste. She said, "We've all been kings and queens, rich and poor, saints and sinners. There's no reason to be jealous." That means it takes a more expansive, encompassing view of who we are as souls. We need to look at all of our experiences. It doesn't matter what our circumstances are during this life. Maybe it's just our time to be poor. Last time we were rich. Each life has its unique challenges that are balanced out with another lifetime. And I love how Dave sums up the interview with this quote: "Conceit, jealousy, selfishness, and unforgiveness are expressions of fear. You can't fear and love at the same time." You may remember Stephen Schwartz had a similar narrative of living well based on his observations of the Edgar Cayce material and his own research. He told us, and I quote, "We can create individual and cultural well-being by choosing actions that are compassionate, life-affirming, and focused on well-being." Stephen, Dave, and Carla challenge us to be mindful of the motivations behind our actions. They use different words, but the outcome is the same: a more peaceful and harmonious world for the individual and for us as a culture. I do hope that videos such as this can give you some insight on what near-death and shared-death experiencers discover about the afterlife, the nature of consciousness, and how to live your life more fully. If you've not already hit that subscribe button, I would encourage you to do so. In addition, I have 6 albums that you can use to start the exploration on your own. If you're ready to jump all in, the best way to experience the other side is to participate in our 5.5-day live retreat. I facilitate this retreat with another wonderful trainer. We'll do 25 exercises into the non-physical universe, and we will have the distinct advantage of supportive group energy and intention. I would encourage you to search the link below associated with the NDE retreat. This link will take you to the information on the different elements in the courses and the skill set you'll learn. This course uses binaural beat technology so that you can attain and sustain expanded states of consciousness easily and safely. That means this course is perfect for both adept meditators and newbies. All will benefit. In addition, I have my albums and other resources linked below. Okay, what's the main message of reincarnation? To quote Dave and Carla, "If we don't take care of each other personally, and we don't take care of this planet, not only is there no place for our friends and family or our children to grow up, there will be no place left for us to return to." If you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, and comment. You can find the Afterlife Files on all podcast streaming apps: Apple, Google, Spotify, Audible, the lot. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, or pay us a visit at neardeathmeditations.com. neardeathmeditations.com. Bye now.